After everything that happened on Thursday night, did you wake up feeling a little differently yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think I just realized that I don't want that moment to happen again, like on court for sure. And yeah, I'm not someone who like I don't know, I don't want to show like I guess weakness in moments, but after the match, I was thinking like maybe it's not a weakness, it's just showing the things that happen in my head and not keeping it inside to the point where I can't play. But I felt with a new perspective, seeing how the support I've gotten since that moment, just seeing how proud of people are of me, regardless of how I do here. So today I felt a lot lighter going on court, and I hope to continue feeling that light weight for the rest of the time here.
Ashe Stadium was supposed to erupt in celebration. Coco Gauff had just fought through a brutal three-set battle. Sweat dripping, lungs burning, every point earned through pure will. But when she stepped up to the microphone, the crowd didn't hear a victory speech. They heard something far more explosive. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked into the cameras and said, "This isn't just about tennis anymore. It's about respect, and who gets it and who doesn't." The air went still. No cheers, no movement, just the sound of thousands of people realizing they'd witnessed something historic. Within minutes, the clip was everywhere. Twitter, ESPN, TikTok, millions replaying that single sentence on loop. Some called it brave, others called it reckless. But one thing was clear: Coco Gauff had just exposed something the WTA could no longer hide. And as the world argued over her words, one question echoed louder than anything else. What really pushed Coco to break her silence on live TV?
I mean, she's probably emotional about it, so I'm not gonna take it with too much anything. And I do hope people give her a little bit of.
The night began like any other showdown under the bright lights of the US Open. The energy inside Ashe Stadium was electric, every serve and rally carrying the weight of expectation. Coco Gauff moved across the court like lightning, focused, relentless, every swing echoing with defiance. She'd been doubted before, but this time she played like she had something to prove. When match point landed, the crowd roared. Reporters leaned forward, ready for the usual polite post-game comments, a smile, a thank you, a sponsor shout-out. But what they got was silence, followed by a truth no one expected to hear. Because while everyone saw a teenager winning matches, Coco saw something else. The whispers in press rooms, the tone of certain questions, the way her confidence was labeled attitude, while others were praised for the same thing. It wasn't new, it had been building for years. So when she finally grabbed that mic, it wasn't a reaction, it was a release. A message to every young player who'd ever been told to stay quiet, smile more, or act grateful. That night, Coco's win wasn't just on the scoreboard. It was in the moment she refused to let the system define her story any longer. But to understand why her words hit like a shockwave, you have to look at what had been happening behind the scenes, where success came with a price no one wanted to admit. From the outside, Coco Gauff's rise looked like a dream, the teenage prodigy who took down legends, landed sponsorships, and smiled through every press conference. But behind that smile, a quiet storm had been brewing. Every move she made was magnified. When she showed emotion after a big point, critics called her too intense. When she celebrated, they called her arrogant. When she showed confidence, she was labeled entitled. Yet when her peers did the same, it was called passion. The double standard wasn't subtle. It was baked into the very culture she was trying to rise above. She heard the coded comments from commentators, the way certain analysts questioned her maturity, or compared her attitude to players who didn't look like her. Even in moments of victory, there was an undertone, as if her success needed to be softened, qualified, or explained. For a while, Coco tried to brush it off. She told herself it was part of being in the spotlight. But the more she won, the louder the criticism grew. And what hurt most wasn't the trolls online. It was seeing the same pattern repeated across the sport. Other women of color being told they were lucky to be there. Not that they earned it. By the time she stood on that US Open stage, she wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for every player who had been told to stay humble, when all they ever did was work harder than everyone else. And somewhere across the world, another young athlete heard those words, and decided she wouldn't stay silent either. Thousands of miles away in Manila, a young rising star named Alex Ila sat in her apartment, phone in hand, watching Coco's speech in stunned silence. She didn't need subtitles to understand it. She'd lived it. The snide remarks, the patronizing interviews, the way people doubted her before she even stepped on the court. Hours later, Alex went live on Instagram, her voice steady but emotional. "Coco's right," she said. "They called me names. They mocked me. But we won't stay quiet anymore." It was a simple statement, but it lit a fuse that tennis couldn't contain. Within hours, hashtags like #Don'tSilenceUs and #StandWithCoco flooded social media. Fans, athletes, and journalists from around the world began sharing stories. Stories of unfair treatment, double standards, and subtle racism that had always been dismissed as just part of the game. But the internet's reaction wasn't all support. Some accused them of being too sensitive, of bringing politics into sports. Comment sections turned into battlegrounds. Sponsors grew nervous, and sports networks tried to spin the conversation as controversy rather than change. Yet, the louder the criticism became, the stronger the message spread. This wasn't about drama anymore. It was about dignity. For every hateful comment, thousands of new supporters spoke up, refusing to let Coco and Alex stand alone. And while social media burned with debate, something far more serious was happening behind closed doors, inside the offices of the WTA itself. Inside WTA headquarters, the atmosphere was tense. What started as a post-match interview had turned into a global controversy, one that threatened to shake the image of women's tennis itself. Emails were flying. Executives were meeting behind closed doors. PR teams were rewriting statements by the hour, trying to contain a wildfire that was already out of control. Some officials wanted action, real conversations, real change, but others pushed for silence. They wanted to wait for the storm to pass, afraid that acknowledging Coco's claims would make sponsors nervous or divide fans. The debate got heated. Some argued that the WTA needed to protect its players. Others said they needed to protect the brand. Meanwhile, players were quietly choosing sides. Some, like Aryna Sabalenka and Iga Swiatek, voiced public support. They said athletes deserved the freedom to speak their truth. But a few older legends weren't as sympathetic, suggesting players should focus on tennis, not politics. That single remark reignited the outrage online. Behind the scenes, sponsors started calling. Broadcast partners wanted reassurance that the tour wouldn't spiral into chaos. But the truth was, the damage was already done, because silence was no longer an option. Coco's speech had pulled the curtain back. Everyone was now forced to confront what had been whispered about for years. And as tension built inside boardrooms, something remarkable began to happen outside them. Players were no longer afraid to speak. Because what Coco started was no longer just a conversation. It was becoming a movement. What began as a single moment of courage quickly turned into something much larger. Coco Gauff's speech had cracked the silence, and now voices from every corner of women's tennis were rising with her. Players who once kept their heads down began to speak out, not just about racism, but about unfair treatment, double standards, and the quiet pressure to behave if they wanted to keep sponsors happy. Naomi Osaka, who had long been vocal about mental health and inequality, reposted Coco's words with a caption that read simply, "Truth always sounds uncomfortable before it sounds right." That post alone racked up millions of views. Leylah Fernandez shared a message of solidarity. Even archived quotes from Serena Williams about being judged differently resurfaced, gaining new meaning in this moment. But as the movement grew, the media tried to twist it. Headlines started framing it as rivalries between players. Coco versus the establishment, or even Coco versus Alex Ila. Networks turned empowerment into entertainment, trying to sell the story as conflict. That's when Coco made her boldest statement yet. During a press conference in Beijing, she looked straight into the camera and said, "We're not fighting each other, we're fighting for change." That single sentence hit harder than any forehand she'd ever swung. It wasn't about drama anymore, it was about unity. The clip went viral, appearing on every sports show, news outlet, and social feed imaginable. Fans started printing the quote on posters, holding them up at tournaments. For the first time, young girls of color around the world saw athletes who looked like them standing up and being heard. And that visibility, that courage, was contagious. The WTA could sense the shift. They couldn't suppress it, spin it, or silence it anymore. The players weren't asking for permission. They were taking their power back. Under mounting global pressure, the WTA finally released a statement. It spoke about inclusivity, diversity, and listening to player voices. But the message felt polished, rehearsed, even. There were no direct mentions of Coco, no acknowledgement of the accusations she'd raised. Just safe words designed to calm headlines without confronting the truth. Fans weren't buying it. Comment sections filled with frustration. "This isn't change," one wrote. "It's damage control." Sports analysts agreed. The tone was corporate, not compassionate. Meanwhile, sponsors who once stayed silent began re-evaluating their stance. A few publicly supported the players. Others quietly pulled back, afraid of choosing sides. Tournaments tried to adjust their image. Some displayed banners promoting equality. Others invited Coco and Alex to speak at charity events, as if inclusion panels could erase years of systemic bias. But the players saw through the PR. This wasn't about hashtags or headlines. It was about accountability. And while the organization hesitated, the movement grew stronger. Players from other sports joined in, posting messages of support, sharing their own experiences. Even outside tennis, athletes and fans began to see Coco's moment as something much bigger than one sport. Coco, meanwhile, stayed calm. No shouting, no rants, just consistency, showing up, speaking out, and playing harder than ever. Her matches drew record ratings. Every interview she gave felt like a masterclass in poise under pressure. The message was clear. She wasn't backing down, and she wasn't alone. But then came the moment that turned the entire controversy into something timeless. A reunion that silenced even her harshest critics. Weeks after the uproar, the world watched as Coco Gauff and Alex stepped onto the same court for an exhibition match. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered. Everyone wanted to see how these two young women who had changed tennis would face each other. But when the match ended, something unexpected happened. Instead of celebrating separately, they walked to the net, smiled, and hugged. No rivalry, no tension, just respect. The crowd rose to its feet, cheering louder than they had all night. That single image, two women of color standing side by side, rackets raised, became a symbol. Headlines read, "Not rivals, revolutionaries." The moment went viral all over again. It wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was about unity, strength, and refusing to be silenced. Even the WTA couldn't ignore it this time. Sponsors began aligning with the movement. Tournaments incorporated equality messages into their broadcasts, and fans showed up holding signs that read, "Don't silence us." For Coco and Alex, the attention wasn't about fame. It was about finally being seen for who they were, not how the system wanted to portray them. They had started as athletes but had become advocates, forcing one of the most traditional sports in the world to confront its own blind spots. And even as tensions lingered behind closed doors, with sponsors calculating risks and executives debating strategy, the narrative had already changed. Tennis didn't look the same anymore. The silence had been broken for good. But Coco's most powerful words were still to come. A simple sentence that turned awareness into awakening. It all came full circle during Coco Gauff's final press conference of the season. Cameras filled the room. Reporters leaned forward, waiting for a soundbite that could headline tomorrow's papers. But Coco didn't give them drama. She gave them truth. "We're not angry," she said softly. "We're aware." The room went silent. No need for shouting. No long explanation. Just awareness. Because awareness is what changes everything. Once you see the patterns, the double standards, the coded language, you can't unsee them. You can't go back to pretending everything's fair. Even her harshest critics began to soften. Not because they suddenly agreed, but because they couldn't deny what they'd witnessed. The power of one voice inspiring another, and another until an entire sport had to face itself in the mirror. Coco Gauff didn't set out to start a revolution that night. But she did. With honesty, courage, and a calm that demanded respect, she exposed the reality that had been hiding in plain sight. And as the lights dimmed on another tennis season, one thing became clear. Coco's fight wasn't about controversy. It was about clarity. Because once the truth is spoken out loud, silence loses its power forever. So the question now isn't whether the WTA hurt her, it's whether they'll ever have the courage to change.